The Dershow.
Bibi is a pragmatist, very, very thoughtful, and very, pragmatic. He's, an idealist, but he's not an ideologue. He's looking very much for resolutions and solutions. I think he'd like to end the war quickly. The war is taking a tremendous toll on Israel. First, the soldiers can't work and they leave their families, and Israel's army consists of reservists mostly. There are, obviously a relatively small number of professional military people, the generals and the major officers, but the fighting forces are largely reservists. I lost a cousin in this war, a distant cousin, not somebody I knew, but I got a call from the president of Israel personally telling me he had been to a Shiva call. That's the call on the family of the dead person, a 33-year-old lawyer with the name of Dershowitz, who had been killed in battle in Gaza, in northern Gaza, in the early days of the war. And so many people in Israel, probably most Israelis, have had personal connections with tragedy, either with people who were killed on October 7th, 1,200 or more, or captured, kidnapped 250 or more. It's a very small country, remember. It's physically the size of New Jersey. And in terms of population, 10 million people, 8 million Jews and 2 million Arabs, Christian and Muslim. It's a very, very small country, smaller than many of our states. People don't realize it because it's done so much for the world. I mean, it's produced so many inventions and patents, and it has been so helpful to the United States in helping to develop military equipment and intelligence and a range of other things. I mean, Israel and the United States are not only allies, they're really partners. They help together to develop the Iron Dome and other defensive mechanisms that may someday have to be used to save the lives of Americans. One hopes not, but one has to always be prepared for that eventuality. Netanyahu has tremendous admiration for Donald Trump. He has tremendous appreciation for Trump for having sent his B-2 bombers to do precision strikes on one of the Iran's nuclear centrifuge facilities buried deep into a mountain. And Israel, with all its technological genius, doesn't have the bombs or the planes that can break into mountains like that. The United States does. And, in a remarkable foray, it sent a handful of those planes from somewhere in the middle of the United States, refueling without stopping, without landing, dropped the bombs, did much destruction. We're not exactly sure how much destruction, certainly set back the Iranian nuclear capacity by some years, 2, 3, 4. Nobody can be completely sure. And Israel, of course, killed a lot of the people who were involved in the nuclear program, weaponizing a nuclear arsenal. And so they don't have the scientists easily at hand to replace the ones that have been killed. And coupled with the destruction that was done first by Israel, they had several days of massive bombardment. And Israel also took out all of Iran's air defenses, making it possible for the United States to safely fly its B-2s over Iranian land. Had Israel not taken out those air defenses, it would have been impossible for the United States safely to have sent its bombers with those very, very heavy bombs. They dropped the bombs, they returned, they never stopped, they never landed, they were refueled. The whole operation took half a day or something like that. And it accomplished a great deal and probably saved a lot of lives. The other thing that's important to note is that both the United States and Israel, which together, probably had a week of bombing of Iranian nuclear facilities, there were hardly any civilian casualties. Israel doesn't ever want civilian casualties. It does everything in its power. Why were there no civilian casualties in Iran? Because Iran took its civilians away, whereas Hamas does the opposite. It doesn't allow its civilians to go into the tunnels for protection. It reserves the tunnels only for its fighters, and it requires the civilians to stay above ground. And they also fire rockets from schools, churches, mosques, and other places, hospitals. They hide their warriors in hospitals under the buildings. And so Israel has a choice: either let the terrorists stay there or kill the terrorists, but in the process, you will probably kill some civilians. There are rules regarding that in international law. The primary rule is the rule of proportionality. It's a very simple rule, but obviously not so easy to enforce. What it basically says is if you have a military target that you have reason to believe is important, but will also entail collateral damage, that is the killing of some civilians, you have to make a judgment, and it's a judgment call. You have to conclude that the value of the military target is proportional to the number of civilians that may be killed in the process of getting that military target. So, for example, when they went after Sinwar, who's the head of Hamas, if it took, killing 10 civilians to get Hamas head, that would be proportional, and the law would permit that. On the other hand, if you had a single terrorist who didn't pose a major threat and you had to kill 10 civilians to get that one terrorist, that would be disproportional. And so you have to look at all the data and all the evidence. And my conclusion is clear, and this was confirmed by all the Israelis that I spoke to. I spoke to people from intelligence, I spoke to the president, I spoke to the Speaker of the House, I spoke to pretty much every important person in Israel, even in my first 3 days here. The ratio of civilians to combatants that have been killed during this entire almost 2-year war is the lowest of any war in modern history. If you take the Hamas figures, which are totally false, totally exaggerated, the figure is about 3-to-1. That is 3 civilians killed for every one combatant. By the way, they say a lot of children are killed, but they count as children 19-year-olds with rockets or 18-year-olds with rockets. They arm 15-year-olds. And if somebody is armed and is 15 or 16 and is firing rockets, yeah, he's a child, but he's also a combatant, but not according to Hamas. Hamas says if you're a child, you're not a combatant. So if you're 19 years old and you're firing rockets into a school in Israel, according to Hamas, if you're killed by Israeli counter fire, they have killed a child or a woman. Women are combatants. Women are firing rockets. Women are hiding the rocket senders in the middle of their homes or in the middle of their schools. So, don't take seriously these data that are so naively reproduced by the New York Times and CNN without a deep dive into what comprises the numbers. And I think if you split the difference and you say, well, Israel says the ratio is approximately 1-to-1, Hamas says it's approximately 3-to-1. Let's assume we settle on 2-to-1, or even accept the Hamas figures, 3-to-1. That's a lower ratio of civilians to combatants that any country has produced in a comparable war in the history of warfare. Nobody's done that well, 3-to-1. In places like Iraq and Afghanistan, the ratios are more like 7-to-1.